If you're watching this, then you're likely to be a hardcore fan freak like me. Some people prefer to listen to content, but while I like to do that, I also like searchable content. So what I've done is I've been creating my content as blog posts, but I'm also going to put them into video format so that if you prefer to listen to content or listen and look at a few visuals while you're listening to the content, you've got the choice. Hilariously, I thought that I would make about a 1 hour video for each half of an episode, and I made this one. And wait till you get to the end and find out how far through the episode I actually got. This is episode 2 of my video blogging, and we are still in episode 1 of season 1 of The Wheel of Times, and we're going to talk about red herrings. Now, I just love the switch that's made here by making Lan the red herring for the Fain. The scene opens with a dark night and stormy conditions, and as book readers, we had a few things swirling in our minds on the first watching. Firstly, we knew that Rand had not seen the Fain on the Quarry Road, and our book minds knew regardless that there is a Fain in the area. So 1 minute we're safely in the inn celebrating Egwene, and suddenly here we are out in a storm in the dark. The inn door opens and we see boots and then a hooded figure. We know it's Lan, but we also saw the Fain riding into town in the storm in the trailer. And this was a brilliant use of suspense and off-screen anticipation. What I really liked about this too is that in the books we had a red herring about the Fain. In the books, the red herring was Tom arriving in the night with a cloak. It was immediately obvious that Tom was not the same person the young men of the Two Rivers were seeing about the place. But in the same way, we get caught up for just a moment, and then it's obvious that this is Lan and not a Fain. The real suspense came from the way bare seconds of these and other scenes at Tarrant Ferry were used in the trailers. The suspense is rounded off perfectly by the way all in the inn turn with a look of apprehension as those boots appear in the doorway. Delicious. The meet cute. Did all of you book readers squeal and get goosebumps at the interactions between Nynaeve, Lan and Moiraine at their first meeting? This scene was a delight to me because it was another example of us being shown something we didn't actually see fully in the books. But as book readers, we do know the path Lan and Nynaeve will take. The look on Nynaeve's face when Lan first enters and as she confronts him is so exactly Nynaeve perfect. That is what brought the squeal out of my mouth. It was so Nynaeve. A meet cute is an amusing or charming first encounter between two characters that leads to the development of a romantic relationship between them. Let's look at the scene. A hooded stranger enters and Nynaeve immediately tells him to name himself. Did you notice how the hood shows the same amount of his face as the hood on the actual Fain later? No one else seems to want to respond to his presence, but Nynaeve is never one to shy from any threat, real or perceived. I love how Lan names himself with nothing more than his name, without the Al title, and then says, "This is Moiraine." He gives names, but they mean nothing at all to anyone. He doesn't use his title, nor Moraine's, and he gives his last name, but not hers. With the entrance of Moiraine, the focus shifts immediately to her. Maren greets her after a rather long and awkward pause while Moiraine warms herself at the fire. To all appearances, for the first-time watcher, Lan and Nynaeve fade from the scene completely. So, what makes this a meet cute? It is certainly more amusing than charming, particularly for us watching. I love how effective the cast are at acting with their eyes, expression, and body language alone. Words are few, but the looks are many. They have a very similar look of distrust and readiness to act. They even share a way of looking while appearing to be looking down at nothing in particular. The meet cute is not so much done by Nynaeve asserting herself with the demand Lan names himself. It is more in his quiet reply, followed by a bunch of gorgeous dance of facial expressions and body language cues. Just go watch it again and see how Nynaeve's hand remains on the hilt of that belt knife through the whole interaction. We have some delicious relationship building scenes in later episodes to walk through too, of course. Fantasy comparisons. Most of the time that I've been recording video previously that is not actually a blog narration has been when I've been doing comparisons of beloved stories from my childhood, and they've gone into the no spoilers or light spoilers because they've really just been a bit of fun. But this one really belongs here in the full spoilers because it's kind of funny that the character that hits the spoiler meter is the one of the 5 in Narnia that does not correlate to a single Eamondsfield 5 character. Instead, she correlates partly to one Eamondsfield 5 and to another character that we certainly love. So do jump into the blog and look for the video that's in there, fantasy comparisons on 5 in Narnia. The Aes Sedai Ring. When Maren Alvier asks Moiraine what she would like, she uses the term "m'lady." In answer, Moiraine subtly, not so subtly, shows her Aes Sedai ring. Maren is taken aback and obviously recognises the ring, instead of Lan announcing her as Moiraine Sedai, because he only called her Moiraine. In the books, the interactions between Moiraine and the 3 boys, as well as Ewan Fingar, are quite comical in regards to her name. If we really pull this apart closely, Maren calls her "m'lady," and Ewan constantly insists she is the Lady Moiraine. Her response to Ewan is that her name is simply Moiraine. Lan introduces her as simply Moiraine, but then she allows Maren to introduce her as Moiraine Sedai after calling her a lady. I just keep chuckling over that because there's all these really cute little mashups and flips of contrast between characters and scenes and who says or does what that must just tickle Rafe's fancy constantly. The situation in the books plays out differently because there's more time and there's a lot more going on. The pilot episode needs to achieve what took 200 or so pages in the book to cover. So simply announcing that she's Aes Sedai immediately, it just makes sense. One of the main things that was important about the fact of Moiraine being an Aes Sedai was the distrust in the village of this fact. Within literally a couple of minutes, we established this with 4 rapid events. So firstly, Nynaeve is distrustful that cloaked figures arrive at night in a storm. Secondly, the ring announces this is an Aes Sedai, and the collective gasp and facial expressions from laughter to suspicion nail the atmosphere. Thirdly, the The response of Rand when Perrin says she looks normal brings us right into feeling suspicious too. The writing is great as it brings this back around to dovetail into the previous discussion on the war in the South. And fourthly, we top it off full circle with Nynaeve in classic style. She nips their 4-sentence conversation short, saying it will be better when she is gone. The cherry on the top is the way she then turns it all around onto Perrin, sending him for his wife. It's just so Nynaeve in perfection. In the books, the 3 boys are talking about Moiraine and what Fain had been saying about the war in the South, and it's Egwene that cuts the conversation off, saying, Nynaeve says. In essence, we got all the important facts. We got them fast. They were delivered differently, even by different characters, but they were delivered. In each case, the way they were delivered also showed us important things about each of our characters. Aes Sedai or normal? In the show, we hear one brief conversation on what it means to be an Aes Sedai. Perrin and Rand discuss Moiraine as she heads upstairs. Nynaeve approaches to throw her opinion in. They manage to convey a lot in just 5 lines of dialogue. A range of discussions are held in the books along these same lines. Different combinations of characters bring up the issues surrounding dealing with an Aes Sedai. These issues range from them being poisonous, giving gifts with hooks, being dark friends, and being able to heal. We also hear discussions regarding the truth an Aes Sedai tells is not always the truth you think you hear. In the show, Rand and Perrin discuss Moiraine. Perrin feels she looks pretty normal, while Rand is sceptical. The 2 pieces of information Rand brings forward are that she may have exceptional hearing, firstly. I remember laughing so much at that on my first watching, as we know that Moiraine indeed has some eavesdropping tricks. Conversely, in the books, while Rand is still sceptical, Mat has the verbose opinions. Rand is confronted by Nynaeve and then by Egwene as well. The conversations are more complex, however, we find ourselves left with a similar feeling from just 5 lines. We now know that Aes Sedai look like anyone else. This immediately clues us in that we can expect their faces to look normal. There will be no ageless look. To be honest, I think it could have ruined the credibility of the show if that one thing had not been done perfectly. So for this reason, I'm happy to just drop the effect. It always felt to me like it could be as difficult as showing the blue Fremen eyes in Dune. So often, every rendition, they look just plain false to me on the screen, like somebody wearing pale blue contact lenses. While in the book, I always had the most eerie picture of what they looked like. We also know that Aes Sedai could have some strange powers, and hey, we do want to watch out for Moiraine's eavesdropping. And I liked that the war in the South is emphasised again, adding a link to the Aes Sedai. Rand's final sentence then foreshadows what will happen in this very episode when Moiraine turns the Trolloc attack. Okay, I realise Lan had a lot to do with his handy sword work too, but still. Nynaeve throws in the final line. If we had not realised how much negative energy she had been throwing at them when they entered, it's now confirmed. She simply wants them gone, and now. A blacksmith. This is undoubtedly one of the most contentious scenes in the show. For book readers at any rate. For show-only viewers, it just tells a lot of things and grabs attention that all is not right in Perrin's life. I have thought long and hard about both this scene and all the implications of what unfolds. To be honest, I've kind of gone up and down at times on how I even feel about it. Many of us knew in advance that she would be in the episode, and I'm glad I had some forewarning, as her presence was not a shock because I didn't realise her appearance would be so short, nor so dramatic. We receive a great segue as Nynaeve pokes her nose in at the end of the last scene. She asks Perrin where Layla is, yet she obviously knows, as the next sentence shows. I love the way she sends Perrin after her as though he's still a child. And he goes. Nynaeve has just met Lan for the first time. How many thoughts and emotions are going through her head right now? It feels to me as though she's mesmerised by the strangers. They climb the stairs and she turns around and snaps at Perrin. Oh, so Nynaeve. I also noted how Perrin asks Nynaeve to give Egwene my best. I'm quite sure all this plays into the picture Nynaeve is building about the relationship between them. Perrin enters the forge, and there is a truly beautiful cinematic scene with a lot of showing and very little telling. Layla is absorbed in her forge work. I felt that her absorption seemed more like using the work as an escape than a craftsperson caught up in the task. We certainly feel there is a tension there with history. Perrin asks her why she's here, but she gives no answer. Again, felt like there's a history to this dance they're doing. The scene ends with a cute flip on a classic Star Wars scene. In The Empire Strikes Back, Leia tells Hans she loves him. This happens literally moments before he's frozen alive in carbonite, and he says, "I know." As soon as she replied that to Perrin, I had the gut-dropping feeling of premonition. Oh no, this is going to get nasty. She is in big trouble. I love all the little parallels we can draw between different fantasy series, as you know that by now, but this one really tickles me. Leia and Layla, similar sounding names. Perrin, the man whose closest ally is a wolf. Hans, the man whose closest ally is a Wookiee. Finally, we know that Layla Dan is a character from the books. Perrin had dreams of marrying her as a youth. She was slim and loved dancing. We see a slim Layla who dances on winter night here. I will talk more about the unfolding of their story when we get there. The Cauthon family. I kind of like how we move from one contentious scene straight to another. It's a bit like ripping the band-aid off, isn't it? Matt does have a family, including sisters that are younger. He does care a lot about them. However, the family dynamics have changed significantly. Look, I believe a huge amount of thought has gone into every single change between book and show. I'm going to say this over and over throughout my written blogs and my video blogs, because I believe it's true. The television medium has to show and not tell, and this medium has to do that showing fast. We had such luxuries in the book. Getting to know each of our 5 main characters, we were introduced to the village, the politics, 4 secondary characters, Oh, epic books are such a different medium. The moment we pick up a 900-page book, we know we have committed to a lot of detail. We want to commit to that. When someone who's never read the books sees a new TV series, they decide if they will commit to an hour to watch the pilot. They will decide if they will continue watching, often based on the first 5 or 10 minutes. Definitely, if they get to the end of the episode, they will then decide if they will give even one more episode a try. It's going to have been like that if you listened to the first of my episodes breaking down the scenes of the show, and you've come back and started listening to a second one, then I've achieved something pretty big, because you could have either not started at all or just closed off after 5 or 10 minutes. So by the time I'd watched this confronting family scene 4 or 5 times, I started to realise something. If the Matt that we know so well from the books were to be put in this family situation, he would behave exactly the way we see him on the show. They didn't change the essence of Matt at all, not even a bit. They created a situation that allowed a new audience to get Matt very quickly. Let's face it, in the book, how many lines are devoted to actually seeing and getting to know Natty, Matt's mother? Her main appearance is in The Shadow Rising. There's a wiki entry in the What Wiki about her that could be worth looking at if you're not sure about Natty in the show. Abel Cauthon plays a slightly bigger role, but really, he's just a bit of a sidekick for Tam Althor. He doesn't really do anything completely on his own. I suspect that we may actually get to see a redemption arc of some kind in the future, and maybe they will both play a more interesting role. I think the young age of his sisters is a bigger change, as we're expecting Bodhi to head to the White Tower later. Again, she doesn't play a pivotal role as herself in the books, so her role could be combined with any other minor character, really. So I think that it's more important to examine what we learn about Matt through his interactions in this scene than how much the family situation changes from the books. Because let's face it, Matt is the main character that we need to develop. So how did they manage that? Matt's first thought when finding his mother outside and drunk is to get her to safety. As soon as he tends to her needs, he ensures that his sisters are as safe as possible. He may be no bloody hero, but he gives them his bed, crude as it already is. He swallows the verbal abuse and simply does what's right. I felt you could see many other things flashing through his head during that entire scene. So if we could have gotten in his head and heard his thoughts, I'm sure he would have been thinking quite the opposite of what he's doing. We discover that Matt is deeper than the lad we saw dicing in the inn. I like the way many people new to the story were immediately conflicted by the different sides of him that they saw from the start. Personally, I thought that was brilliantly done. Kitchen discussions. War. Ooh, what is it good for? Well, what an interestingly concise discussion they have in here. I'm really constantly amazed as I break the scenes down this way, just how concisely the show conveys critical points. Once again, in the books, the concepts we see here take many different characters and dozens of pages to convey. War is just fools killing other fools for foolish causes. This key phrase in the books is pronounced by Tom. Since he hasn't joined the show yet, the line is instead handed to Marin. I love the way the context is slightly changed here. Tom says it to shut Matt up, as he's going on about war and how battles interest him. Marin, on the other hand, is explaining why the Two Rivers folk don't have any need to be involved in war. Even with the change, the concept is clear. The Two Rivers keeps itself apart from most of the world. They're peaceful and they do not get involved in wars. I love the lengths the books go to in order to convey these messages. It's quite brilliant how few words are needed in a TV show setting to convey the heart of the message. Aes Sedai, puppet masters. Within the handful of lines delivered here, we learn another new and important fact quickly. We get this line directly from Tam here, that Aes Sedai pull strings from the White Tower. I love this because in the books, Rand says similar. We know by inference that Rand has very likely heard this from his father. So here Tam says, Aes Sedai don't fight wars, they pull the strings of the world from their White Tower. In the book, Rand says, Aes Sedai, breakers of the world, puppeteers who pulled strings and made thrones and nations dance in designs only the women from Tarvalon knew. Rand is thinking this as he looks at Moiraine and he's about to ask her to heal Tam. Bran then gets to deliver one of his very few lines. He dismisses the conversation. Maybe he doesn't want to continue the discussion in front of Rand and Egwene. Once again, we learn a key fact simply. Finally, alone. I'm pretty sure Rand has been wanting to get Egwene alone about as much as he's been dreading it. I know that feeling of wanting to know all that went on and yet hoping that I won't be told. We receive a little light relief after all the information we've just been presented with. Since the first scene, things have moved fast from one new character or concept to another. While this is the first time we have it confirmed that Egwene and Rand are a couple, we don't learn much else of huge import. This is probably a good relief moment for viewers to mentally catch a breath and just enjoy the scenery. We do learn a few things, of course. Firstly, women's business is not discussed with men. I like the way this was said without using those actual words. Secondly, there has been a connection between Rand and Egwene since early childhood. We clearly see the rock wound on Egwene's arm, and this is a reminder of how serious that initiation was. I wonder if some women truly don't survive it. Bran's concern was probably completely valid when you think about it. I believe Nynaeve used some herbs and creams on her arm. The wound is already closed and mostly proud flesh. From the books, we know that Nynaeve often healed people with channeling when applying her wisdom herbs and remedies. She just didn't know it. This is the first, or one of the very few times, that I have a criticism. Yet look, it does happen, but not often. Rand says, you know, my dad said I used to pick baskets of berries to bring to you when I was a kid, like some lovesick puppy. So what struck me the first time I watched this scene is, why wouldn't Rand remember picking baskets of berries? Like, he must have been old enough to remember if he did it multiple times. And also being able to carry a basket and pick them makes me think that he's of an age when he would remember. I was just as mystified that Egwene didn't seem to have any memory of it either. It's just a little something that got to me and still does when I watch it. Look, I shrug it off because, however, it has no bearing on the story plot or the character arcs. Nothing that I can think of. Just a little anomaly that I kind of go, why doesn't he remember? Because the line could have been delivered that he's bringing up a shared memory that they have. However, the berry in the pocket still makes me laugh every time. My first thought on the first watch as he held it towards her mouth was, no, that's been in his pocket this whole time? Oh. And when Egwene says the same, I just laughed right out loud and thought, they just both nailed their characters with a totally non-book scene. My thought around it possibly being a shared memory as well is that it could have been a really good way of that being brought back when Rand asks Egwene to identify herself through a shared memory in episode 8. Anyway, doesn't matter. And Aes Sedai and her water. I know I could have titled that Butt Rock, but no, I resisted. We learn a lot about the various relationships between an Aes Sedai and her water throughout the early books. And the same happens in the show as we learn about some of the different Arjas. How beautifully we have been shown rather than told what this relationship is. The transition into this scene and then to the next is just as beautiful. From Rand kissing Egwene to Moiraine and Lan here, then back to the post-coital conversation with Rand and Egwene again. Very nicely done. When Moiraine entered the common room, she quickly surveyed the scene. Her eyes hovered momentarily on each of the 5 main characters. She noticed them immediately, and if you watch back again, you can see that they are the only people in the room that fall into the age bracket that she's seeking. Nynaeve has her attention because she confronted them straight up. The others are simply the right age. This is the first time we see weaves as Moiraine channels. It's the second time we've seen channeling. The first time, of course, we're in the POV of the man Liandrin was chasing. It's harder to do true POV in film. In a book, we can hear the internal dialogue. In film, we tend to be in a third person as a spectator POV. It's common, however, to still show things mostly from the POV of one character, and the show does this really quite well by at times using odd camera angles, like being down low, looking up at something. And here, we're in Moiraine's POV rather than Lan's. Another thing we get to see clearly is the close bond. Lan is obviously aware of what Moiraine is feeling to a large degree. This can happen when you spend 20 years travelling with someone, but we know it's deeper than that and it's the bond. Viewers may not fully know this yet, but it'll become more apparent on a rewatch for them. Lan asks if Moiraine thinks it is one of them, and she doesn't answer, so he presses to know which one. Again, no answer. Notice, however, the transition takes us back to the inn. I know Egwene is the first one we see, however, notice that she's brooding, a little like Moiraine was in the tub. Next thing, in walks Rand. Question answered by showing Egwene for wisdom. Well, I love this scene. My main reason is the way it highlights the poor communication skills of these kids. This is something that I both love and hate about the entire series. I've yelled at all our characters thousands of times over my many readings. Yet I've laughed at myself and situations in my own life over the years where I see how true to life they are. This scene is one awkward series of missed connections after another. Firstly, Ran walks in and says that Egwene let him fall asleep. Egwene's reply is classic. Instead of telling him to own his own actions, she gives a rather passive reply. You act as if I had some say in the matter. And Ran just lets it roll off him and moves to what he really wanted to ask about anyway. He knows that he cut her off earlier. He had asked how it went, and when she was about to expand a little, he'd done the big pash. Egwene at least decides to cut to the heart and admit it wasn't so much the initiation as her offer to become apprentice. Rand immediately makes her offer and her choices for her life all about him. When I think about how old they both are, I feel sympathetic to this. It is something that I've had to learn to be really conscious of. To be fair, we'll see that he is more mature about all this once he sleeps on it and has some time alone. His first reaction is to exclaim on the fact that she'll have no husband or children. And you can see the pain in his face as it hits him. His first reaction to realising that is to run away from any possible confrontation on this. Egwene has obviously been dreading this too and gives little resistance to him leaving. She has to make her own decisions and she's obviously putting a lot of thought into them. As she sinks into her own thoughts, the wind changes. You can feel the impact of that change with her as she responds with concern. She doesn't know what it means, but she did just tell Rand that Nynaeve thinks she can listen to the wind. In the book, we learn that all wisdoms are either supposed to have this talent or at least all claim they do. The ability is attributed to Sedai. This indicates that any wisdom who can truly do this is a channeler. I think it's likely that they're usually wilders. However, an apprentice wisdom who is taught well by a wilder may learn to do this if they have the ability to learn to channel. Now, this is not explicitly explained as canon in the books. That's just my feeling. The meaning is literally to predict seasons, the weather, and their impact on crops and environmental stability. Nynaeve has the talent, but she also has an extension that allows her to predict approaching trouble. She doesn't know for a long time how to separate it from the weather and the other trouble that she can sense. She's a wilder, so maybe this is the way she first touched Sedai. The book's not clear. We also don't see any other channeler who has this ability in the books. It looks to me, at any rate, that the show may expand on this talent. Instead of it being something Nynaeve alone experiences, Egwene senses the Fade riding into town. This happens through the wind rising and moving into the room around her. She turns and looks out onto the street. I wonder if this will make more sense of her quick affinity with the windfinders of the Seafolk later. Makes sense to me. It would be useful if windfinders can listen to the wind, sense trouble approaching, and influence the wind currents. This is the perfect segue to transition to the next scene. So I'll talk about that in a minute because that will include how that scene transitions into the one following it. Oh, I must say just here, the transitions in this show are masterful. Who rides at night? A gorgeous example of show not tell indeed. In the book, as we've said, Rand sees the Fade on the quarry road. We don't. Rand tells his father what he has seen. Rand discusses it all with both Mat and Perrin. We get told a lot about this mysterious dark cloak rider. A delightful transition. Notice that the last scene ended with Egwene hearing the wind change. She just told Rand that Nynaeve thinks she can learn to listen to the wind. Now we move outside into the rain as we hear hoofbeats, and the visuals work to enhance the mystery as we see the hooves, the legs, and move up to the body. We have the red herring of Lan arriving earlier. In the first seconds, this rider looks very much like Lan did. The camera angle changes and we see a face inside the hood. It's all so brief. This is the perfect way to introduce us to our first example of body horror. Wheel of Time uses a lot of body horror and uses it effectively. In the brief moments of vision, all we know is that something about this face is wrong or not right. And many of us will have concentrated so much on that face that at first they might have missed the skull armour on the horse. Did you see that the first time instantly? We're whipped into the next scene with the echoing musical transition of the whistling. Did you notice any of that on your first watching? I know I didn't. I mean, I heard Padan Fain whistling, but I didn't catch that it started while we were seeing the Fade. Oh, I noticed that the wind had picked up, and I realised that was linked to the Fade. But, I thought it was the storm increasing as it arrived. Due to some hearing issues, I always watch shows with the subtitles turned on. So I saw the whistle as it started. I saw Padan Fain whistle as he drives into the village. Yet, I still didn't quite have the time to connect the dots. And that was a delicious connection when I watched the second, and every subsequent time I've loved it. Enter Padan Fain. We all know that Robert Jordan deliberately used obvious plot and character similarities to other fantasy stories. He gave particular attention to similarities to The Lord of the Rings. The entrance of Padan Fain in the books does not have the same feeling we see here. Yet, what better way to give an immediate show not tell similarity than to have Padan Fain ride in on the ramshackle wagon. Children dance and run about him shouting, and he smiles and wildly calls out, seemingly all good-naturedly to them. I loved how they did this. Once again, we didn't have time to draw a lot of pictures with words to get this similarity. I love that the children are about the same size as hobbits. The amount of showing they pack into every scene is thought out to the minutest of details. In the books, we have all the discussions in hushed tones from the boys. They discuss the impending Beltane festivities plan and how they will include fireworks. We have suspense building because they haven't yet arrived. The fireworks should have been a secret. The fireworks gave us a big Lord of the Rings vibe, especially as they're linked to the festivities. Notice how quickly this scene that lasts less than a minute gives us a warm Lord of the Rings glow. Since we know that things do not go well in the celebration in the parallel of the Lord of the Rings scene, we have a clue now. On our first watch, the whistling just seems to be an audio transition. After that, the whistling links Fain and the Fade. Delightfully done. The other thing I love is the way it's another flip, because in the books, Tom was the one who was supposed to be coming in and bringing fireworks and all of the entertainment, and had the big cloak and the long hair and, the mustaches, and he's the one who had the Gandalf-y feel. While in the show, Fain has the Gandalf-y feel. Oh, well, maybe just at first, not for very long. The best bread. We know this scene was originally written with more dialogue than was kept. It was released during WhatCon 2022. I didn't feel it was necessary to further the story personally. A lot of dialogue means a lot of telling and can take more time to convey something important than simply showing. We're shown several key things in this short scene. Firstly, the time link tells us that it's the next morning as Egwene brings breakfast to Tam. Tam stayed at the Winespring Inn. Maren Alvear is renowned for her baking skills. And finally, Rand left the inn early and alone. The timing in the books is slightly different as Rand and Tam go home on winter night and the attack occurs. The show, Rand and Tam stay the night and go home on the night of bell time and the attack occurs. After a lot of deliberation, I realised that bell time never comes up again in the 15 books. It's not necessarily celebrated through all the countries and cultures. Look, it sets a great scene for the best bell time ever to become a nightmare. But apart from that, it doesn't add to the overall story arc or even the character arcs. So you might think it did add to Egwene's arc, and yeah, true, it did in a way, and that's why they used the highly visual initiation and hair braiding ceremony instead. They gave Egwene her starting point, and it stuck in the minds of everybody way better, whether you've read the books or not. I feel this is all that was needed in the scene because we established those few key things above, and it provides the link to Egwene going to Rand on the mountainside. So it makes sense that she knew where he would go, thinking about the words that they'd had last night, and it was all done in seconds. Habits. This is one scene where I don't have much to say. I know, right? I would love to know if anyone has any ideas on how holding the pinky finger is anything more than a habit. I feel this scene, again, is a very brief moment that shows Perrin and Layla are not in sync. It does seem to indicate that she has feelings for him still. The first scene in the Forge seemed to be intimating that their relationship was in worse shape than it is here. Will we see Fail do the same pinky holding? Or will Perrin do it to Fail? Or will it mean absolutely nothing? Oh, isn't it fun to have things that we really are clueless about? Okay, not as ground shaking as other mysteries, but hey, if it does turn into something, I'll be whooping. The main thing I felt that we were seeing here is that they are not in sync, but there are feelings. In the books, of course, Perrin returns to Eamon's Field to see Layla Hearn. She's married with a child and he thinks about his past feelings for her and that he would have married her. That is, of course, if he hadn't left in a rush on that winter night. The big question. The question, if put out in black and white, is, did Mat steal Danya's bracelet? Let's stop and think about him purely from the early pages of Eye of the World. These are typical words to describe him: lazy, immature, tactless, roguish, and brazen. He'll try anything to shirk responsibility and work. Because he's less mature in the books, he's catching badgers, flowering dogs, and stealing honey cakes. And these are all seen as typical childhood behaviour for boys, and they're expected to outgrow such things. They're actually acceptable behaviours. I'm still teetering on my own opinion of the scene. Did he somehow sweet talk or make a wager of some kind with Danya? I want to think so. As Matt's one of my favourite characters, and it hurt my little heart to see him in this scene. However, I know the evidence points most convincingly to him hiding the fact that he has it. This is evident when Fain asks if he'd be able to sell it here in the village. It's possibly even more evident when Fain says, "What do you have for me this year?" To me, it's possible that Fain even convinced Matt as a child that he could bring treasures to him and make money. Just a thought. Motivation. I believe his motivation, which does not absolve the action, is to ensure Beltane lanterns for his family. I'm not convinced he would just look at her bracelet and steal it because he's greedy. Then again, we do know he is attracted to shiny things and treasure. Remember his response to seeing the Tower of Genji from the spray? His immediate thought is that there would be treasure in there. I don't think that was the dagger. The treasure in Shadow Logoth mesmerised him. Yet I feel that the appeal to take treasure is the belief that it has been found and it belongs to no one. We also see Matt eyeing the gem on the Aiel in the cage. Again, he feels this belongs to no one. So is it the same thing as outright stealing? I know, splitting hairs. Transacting with Fain. Even though we see that huge smile from Fain, it's obvious that he has one goal. He's there to make a profit. Not just a bit of profit either. Fain will take advantage of every opportunity to increase that profit too. Either Matt is not really experienced at this after all, or just no match for Fain. The bargaining is fast, and Matt goes from asking for 3 marks to accepting 3 lands worth half a mark. I think that this is actually setting a really important starting point for the relationship between Matt and Fain. So while I don't necessarily like the idea of Matt stealing, this whole business between Matt and Fain over the dagger throughout the history of the books, maybe this is actually going to set a really good starting point for how that's going to unfold in the show. Fain also has the advantage that Matt can't sell the bracelet to anyone else. It's his grin at the end that really creeped me out. Wait till we see Fain in later seasons. I love the detail in Fain's wagon and the goods he has on sale. I can spend a lot of time just looking at all the tiny items they went to so much trouble to meticulously set up here. Go back and just re-watch this little scene and pause and just look through his wagon. Phenomenal. We communicate. We often joke about the abundance of poor communication in the Wheel of Time books. And I had forgotten how easily Lan and Moiraine communicate with the helpful assistance of the Bond. They only need a few words for 2 main reasons. Firstly, they have been on this mission for 20 years, so that means it's likely they ask and comment on the same things frequently. Secondly, though, the Bond allows them to already know a certain amount about how the other is feeling about any situation. There are only 3 lines in this scene. The first line isn't needed for them, it's for us. Moiraine states that Lan didn't sleep last night. He knew that she knew, and she knew that he knew, but we had to know. Moiraine can't know exactly what he's thinking, but she knows that he didn't sleep and that he's on alert and there's something concerning him. She has a pretty good idea why, and she asks him the question that she's pretty sure she knows the reason. All Lan needs to do is give that tiny expression, and Moiraine has the answer she needs. We know that one of the benefits a water has is the ability to detect shadow spawn. Now show watchers know it as well. According to book canon, Aes Sedai can also detect shadow spawn. It would appear that this ability is stronger in some than others, just as all other ability levels and skills are different in each person. In the book, as the Trollocs attack on Winter Night, Lan and Moiraine detect them and come running out of the inn. I'll talk more about this when we get to the corresponding scenes in the show. I keep coming back to this. What concept is it important for viewers to understand? We have such limited screen time. The water bond and 2 huge benefits are explained in just 3 lines of dialogue, coupled, of course, with a few seconds of great facial acting. Her final statement is all that they need to do their separate tasks. We don't know exactly what their work is at this point. The following scene shows us their separate tasks. Lan goes scouting for evidence of how close the fade is. Moiraine gets cracking to figure out which one is the dragon. I love how they hold this conversation and set themselves their next tasks, all the while out in public. They're talking while walking, and that is often the best way to hold a private conversation. I loved the attention to detail that's been given to the village. If you pause the video at this point and just look around, you see more and more and more. If you were to try and write notes on all the detail you can see, you would have pages and pages of description. Well, that rings true to my Wheel of Time. Okay, that gets us nearly 23 minutes into episode 1, so we're not even quite halfway. Although I must say that when I recorded the first video, I was starting to wonder if it was going to actually take me 5 videos to do each episode, but it looks like maybe, we'll have to see as I keep writing in the blog, maybe I'll get through each episode in 4 videos, but it's going to be a shit ton of blog posts because some of the scenes in the second half of episode 1 are probably going to find me being, well, overly wordy is one way people might put it. I hope you're enjoying this. I'm having the time of my life breaking this down scene by scene. I might not have done this had season 2 hit last year, but I just can't stand waiting and waiting without doing something, and so into the rabbit hole I dove, and thanks for coming along with me. I'm Koala Sedai, and I have got so much to say about the best books and maybe the best show ever, The Wheel of Time.